You wake up one morning feeling slightly off, not sick enough to stay in bed, not well enough to feel confident, and you brush it aside because life after 40 is busy, demanding, relentless, and filled with responsibilities that leave little room for self-inspection. Yet what if that quiet sensation were not fatigue from yesterday's workload or stress from unfinished tasks, but the earliest whisper of something far more serious moving silently beneath the surface of your body? Many people grow up believing that a heart attack arrives dramatically, with crushing chest pain and a collapse to the floor. But reality is often more subtle and therefore far more dangerous, especially as the years accumulate and the cardiovascular system carries the imprint of every meal, every sleepless night, every unresolved worry, and every choice made without thinking about tomorrow. The human body is astonishingly intelligent, constantly communicating through sensations that seem ordinary until they are no longer, and the tragedy is not that these messages are unclear, but that they are so easy to ignore when they do not fit the dramatic picture we expect. A tight jaw after waking, a strange heaviness in the neck while driving, breath that feels shorter climbing stairs you once conquered effortlessly, a wave of dizziness that disappears as quickly as it came, cold sweat on a mild day, or an anxious flutter in the chest that you attribute to nerves can all be part of a language spoken quietly by the heart. A language that grows more important to understand after 40, when risk rises not as a sudden leap but as a steady incline that rewards attention and punishes neglect. Medical researchers and educators like Dr. William Li have often emphasized how the body possesses remarkable defense systems and early warning networks, and how listening to those signals can mean the difference between prevention and crisis, between adjusting a path and being forced into an emergency. This perspective invites a shift in how we see health, not as something that collapses overnight, but as something built or eroded through countless small moments, through habits that accumulate silently just as plaque can accumulate within arteries, narrowing them little by little until blood flow struggles and tissues cry out for oxygen. After 40, metabolism changes, inflammation can simmer more easily, blood vessels may stiffen, and stress hormones may linger longer in circulation, all of which makes awareness not a luxury but a necessity, a form of daily vigilance that does not come from fear but from respect for the complexity of the machine that carries us through decades of living, loving, working, and dreaming. Consider how often people dismiss tiredness as age, how frequently a short breath becomes a joke about being out of shape, how quickly an ache in the shoulder or jaw is blamed on sleeping badly, and how instinctively anxiety is chalked up to deadlines or family concerns. Yet the heart does not always announce distress with a siren. Sometimes it taps gently on the walls of consciousness, waiting to see if anyone is paying attention. There is something profoundly empowering about realizing that these early signs are not sentences but invitations. Invitations to pause, to consult a professional, to request tests that look beyond the surface, to explore blood pressure, cholesterol, inflammation markers, imaging, or stress tests that can reveal what cannot be felt directly, because knowledge obtained early expands options, and options are what transform frightening possibilities into manageable plans. This mindset is not about living in constant alarm, but about cultivating curiosity toward your own biology, treating unusual sensations as data rather than nuisances, and understanding that caring for the heart is inseparable from caring for the whole self, including sleep quality, movement, nutrition, emotional resilience, and social connection, all of which feed into vascular health in ways science continues to uncover. It is also about reframing age not as a countdown but as an accumulation of wisdom, a stage of life where experience can finally be applied to self-preservation, where you recognize that showing up for your health is not selfish but responsible, because the people who depend on you benefit when you remain strong, present, and capable of sharing years yet to come. As this realization settles in, a quieter question begins to emerge beneath the surface of everyday routines. A question that carries both urgency and hope, asking what other messages the body might be sending right now, unnoticed in the rush of obligations, and whether today could be the moment to slow down just enough to hear them, because somewhere between routine and reflection lies the thin line that separates ignoring a warning from responding to it, and that line, once crossed, can redefine not only the course of an illness, but the trajectory of an entire life. As awareness grows, so does an uncomfortable tension, because recognizing subtle warnings forces a confrontation with habits long taken for granted. And this is where the story becomes unsettling, since many people would rather cling to normalcy than investigate the possibility that something inside them is shifting in a dangerous direction. There is a strange psychological refuge in assuming that tomorrow will resemble today, that the body will keep performing as it always has, and that discomfort is merely a temporary inconvenience, Yet the cardiovascular system does not operate on assumptions. It responds to biology, chemistry, pressure, and flow, all unfolding continuously whether attention is paid or not. Beneath calm exteriors, arteries can be narrowing, inflammation can be irritating delicate vessel walls, blood sugar fluctuations can be damaging tissue, and chronic stress can be keeping the nervous system in a state of constant alert, accelerating wear in ways that feel invisible until the threshold is crossed. This is what makes silent cardiac events so frightening, not because they are mysterious, but because they progress quietly enough to coexist with daily life, with meetings attended, errands run, dinners cooked, jokes told, and plans made for years ahead, while inside the body a clock is ticking that no one hears. Dr. William Li has spoken about the body's inherent ability to protect itself when given the right conditions, highlighting how nutrition, movement, sleep, and emotional balance can activate internal defense mechanisms that preserve blood vessels and reduce dangerous processes long before catastrophe strikes. That philosophy reframes health not as a fragile state easily lost, but as a dynamic relationship between choices and biology, one that can tilt toward resilience or vulnerability depending on what is practiced consistently. And after 40, consistency becomes the defining factor, because occasional good intentions cannot compensate for years of neglect, just as small improvements made daily can gradually reverse trends that once seemed inevitable. The unsettling part is realizing that this power is both comforting and terrifying. Comforting because change is possible. Terrifying because inaction is also a choice, and its consequences accumulate with equal dedication. Suspense builds when you imagine how many people are walking through ordinary days right now with no idea that a plaque deposit is thickening in a coronary artery, or that blood pressure has crept upward month by month, or that insulin resistance is quietly damaging the lining of vessels, because these processes rarely announce themselves loudly. They whisper through mild fatigue, subtle swelling, fleeting chest tightness that resolves with rest, or a sudden wave of nausea that disappears before anyone else notices. The mind becomes an accomplice in this silence, supplying rationalizations faster than facts, insisting that the schedule is too full for a doctor's visit, that it is probably nothing, that tests can wait until after the next deadline, the next holiday, the next project, while the body keeps negotiating with physics and chemistry, hoping the load does not exceed its capacity. At this point in the narrative, a crucial shift occurs, because the question is no longer whether silent warning signs exist, but whether they will be met with curiosity or denial. And that choice often hinges on perspective, on whether health is seen as a fixed inheritance or as an evolving partnership. Those who choose curiosity begin to notice patterns, the way breath shortens after smaller efforts than before, the persistence of aches that once vanished overnight, the subtle irregularity of a heartbeat during moments of rest, the sleep that no longer feels restorative, the swelling in ankles after long days, or the creeping anxiety that appears without an obvious trigger. And instead of brushing these off, they document them, mention them, investigate them. Understanding that information gathered early is like turning on lights in a dark room, revealing obstacles before collision becomes inevitable. The tension intensifies because acknowledging vulnerability is uncomfortable, especially in cultures that prize endurance and self-reliance. Yet endurance without insight is not strength, it is simply delay. And self-reliance does not mean ignoring professional guidance. It means taking responsibility for seeking it. Cardiovascular evaluations, blood work, imaging studies, and stress tests may sound intimidating, but they are tools of empowerment, translating vague sensations into measurable data that can guide action. And once numbers and images replace guesses, fear often gives way to clarity, because clarity allows for strategies. Whether that means adjusting diet toward foods that support vascular health, committing to regular physical activity that strengthens the heart muscle, managing stress through breathing or mindfulness, improving sleep hygiene, or addressing risk factors like hypertension and cholesterol with medical supervision. What makes this moment suspenseful is that it sits at the crossroads between two futures, one where warnings are ignored until they crescendo into an emergency room visit that no one planned for, and another where attention leads to prevention, where a frightening possibility becomes a motivating catalyst for redesigning daily life. And the difference between these paths is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It is often defined by a phone call made or postponed, by an appointment scheduled or avoided, by the willingness to treat a strange sensation not as an interruption but as a message worth decoding. In this quiet turning point, the heart is not yet screaming, but it is speaking, and whether that voice is heard determines how the story continues. The final movement of this reflection is not about fear, but about agency, about reclaiming authorship over a story that too many people assume is written solely by genetics or age. Because while heredity and time certainly play roles, they do not hold exclusive rights to the future of the heart, and this is where inspiration quietly replaces suspense, revealing that the same body capable of developing silent danger is also capable of remarkable recovery when given attention, consistency, and care. Research repeatedly shows that arteries can become more flexible, inflammation can be reduced, circulation can improve, and metabolic balance can be restored through sustained lifestyle changes. And this aligns with the philosophy often shared by educators like Dr. William Li, who emphasizes that the human body contains powerful systems of protection and repair waiting to be supported rather than sabotaged. This realization reframes middle age not as the beginning of decline, but as a decisive chapter, a point where wisdom finally meets biology, where experience can translate into better choices, and where prevention becomes a daily practice instead of an abstract idea discussed only after something goes wrong. What transforms knowledge into momentum is the understanding that heart health is not constructed in rare heroic efforts, but in ordinary routines repeated quietly, in meals that lean toward vegetables, fruits, whole grains, healthy fats, and lean proteins rather than processed excess, in walks taken even when motivation is low, in strength training that preserves muscle and insulin sensitivity, in moments of breathing that calm a nervous system trained by years of urgency, in nights protected for sleep instead of sacrifice to screens, and in social connections that buffer stress in ways no supplement ever could. Each of these actions may feel small in isolation, but together they form an environment in which blood vessels are treated kindly, blood pressure stabilizes, cholesterol profiles improve, and the heart is no longer forced to operate under constant strain. And the beauty of this approach is that it does not require perfection, only persistence, because biology responds not to occasional brilliance but to steady patterns over time. There is also a deeper philosophical layer to this transformation, one that asks people to reconsider their relationship with discomfort and uncertainty. Because paying attention to subtle symptoms and seeking evaluation requires humility. The humility to admit that the body is not invincible and that needing guidance is not weakness but wisdom. This shift can ripple outward, changing how individuals talk about health with family and friends, encouraging spouses, siblings, and colleagues to schedule checkups, to compare notes on energy levels and stress, to normalize conversations about prevention rather than waiting for crisis to force the topic. And in this way, one person's decision to listen more closely to their own body can quietly influence an entire community, creating a culture where silent warning signs are taken seriously instead of laughed away. The narrative that emerges from this perspective is not dramatic collapse followed by frantic rescue, but gradual awakening followed by deliberate redesign, a story in which someone notices patterns, consults professionals, gathers data, makes adjustments, monitors progress, and slowly feels capacity return, breath deepen, stamina increase, sleep improve, and confidence grow, not because danger has magically vanished, but because it is finally being addressed with clarity and commitment. This is the kind of suspense that resolves not in shock but in resolve. The kind that tightens the chest for a moment only to release it into determination, reminding viewers that the most powerful interventions often happen long before ambulances are involved, in kitchens, on sidewalks, in quiet moments of reflection, and in the simple decision to treat today's body as the foundation for tomorrow's life. Ultimately, the silent heart attack after 40 is not just a medical concept, it is a metaphor for how easily crucial messages can be drowned out by noise, schedules, and assumptions. And learning to hear those messages becomes an act of respect for the intricate system that keeps blood flowing through miles of vessels every second of every day. When people begin to listen, to investigate, and to act, fear gives way to partnership. Urgency transforms into discipline, and aging becomes less about bracing for loss and more about refining how one lives, eats, moves, rests, and connects. Because longevity without vitality is merely extension, while longevity with vitality is a gift continuously earned through awareness.